You are listening to the Level Up Your Gaming podcast, episode 22, Ending a Game. Today we talk about ending your game. We discuss why it's important to put an ending on your game and how to do it regardless of length. We also discuss why your game may be coming to an end and how to control the process. If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you like the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, or tell a friend. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Welcome into the Level Up Your Gaming podcast. My name is Aaron, and still in Georgia, hot as balls. He'll always deliver an epilogue to his games. Jared,
Hi, everyone.
how are you doing, Jared? Aside from hot as balls,
Hot as balls. Hot as balls and drenched because it has been raining here all week. Every morning I walk out, it is wet, and then I go to work and it's dry for a little bit, and then I go out for a smoke and it's wet again. So I've been quite moist between the sweat and the rain. I just want to be dry. Listeners, save me from Georgia.
yeah,
I'm sorry,
we don't have a picture of Jared, but Jared is not by any stretch of the word a small man. He's a large man.
He's called me fat. He called me fat to all of our listeners. He's not a small man. Jesus Christ.
You're not a stick that freezes in the summer, Jared. You're a man
That is true.
You're a man who does not deal with the heat, just like myself in the summer. The summer heat is brutal to you. You like the bitter cold. You are a Northman.
I am a Northman. I'm a Lannister from Game of Thrones, but I'm a Northman by blood. It's just the truth of the matter. For any of you any of our listeners who live below the line in America where regular temperatures become scorching, I don't know how you do this every day. God bless you. And I'm sure that if you came out to our part of the world during the bitter cold winters, you'd say, how do you guys do this every day? And we'd be like, put on a hat.
Yes, indeed. I've been down in the South in the summer, and it is a rough time. But today we are going to talk about an important topic in gaming, and that is ending your game. Okay, we've talked about adding endings in the past, and we've mentioned that it's important. And I think right now we're going to dive into why it's so important to end your game. So what do you think, Jared? Why is it so important to end a game?
Okay, brass tacks, and if our listeners could get one point, why it is important to end your game is because it adds closure to the experience. Role playing in itself is a game of the mind. It's like chess. It's like any other board game. If you notice at the end of chess, at a game of chess, there's a winner or a loser. At the end of any board game, there's a winner and a loser. And there's an emotion that's tied to that, whether it be a failure emotion, like, oh man, I didn't win, or whether it be a emotion of joy, oh my gosh, I finally beat this guy. Role-playing is one of those very few games where, and from my experience when I was a younger storyteller, how many of my games just, I'm done. And it takes away and it cheapens the experience. Suddenly, all that the players had accomplished using their characters in the game is meaningless. There was no emotional tie, because even in the game of chess, you're playing. Technically, it's meaningless. You're not building anything. You're just playing a game. And the thing is that most chess games don't just end in the middle of it, and people just go, well, I'm done. Most chess games will be, you say, just hold on, let us finish this game, or you come back to the game later. I feel in role playing, it just and it's a plague for people with a lot of creativity. You see one idea, or you're telling a story, and then you see an idea for another story, and you really want to tell that story. And instead of waiting patiently, closing out our first story, we just jump into the next one. We just drop it and jump. I call it storyteller ADHD. it's just you just jump into the next game. So it's very important because it leaves one a lot of unfinished business. Your players had plans for that game. Your players might have had, I wanted to do X, even if it's part of a small part of a larger campaign. They may have wanted to accomplish X, Y, and Z, and now those plans are finito. They didn't even get done. Maybe they didn't even get started. I almost wish they wouldn't get started more than they were halfway baked, and then you took the souffle out of the oven a little bit too fast. So when it comes down to it, though, it's that emotional tie. It's the accomplishment of things that you set out to do. So that's why it's so important, because if you don't, one, there's just disappointment, and two, there's disappointment over not getting to do what you wanted to do.
Yeah,
and yes, your mind. Go ahead.
I mean, think about, every game that you've put an awesome opening. You've brought your players together. We talked about how important the gathering was in our very first episode. Now your players are emotionally invested in one another. They've been running along your story for so long, and and then you get fatigued, or they get fatigued, or or the game stops. The game takes a turn for the worse. A bunch of players die. I don't know how you want to how your game goes topsy turvy and goes tits over.
Tits over what?
Tits over tin cups. I forgot the phrase.
Ass over tin cups.
Ass over tin cups.
Up.
Tits up. That's it. Okay. Hey, see, I'm not really good with these these phrases.
Stick to fantasy locations. Yes. You're fantastic at that.
I'm good at fantasy locations, not at old sayings and slogans. So
my player just went tits over bacon. What does that mean?
I think but no, it's so draining as a player when you have invested emotionally in your character. You've learned things in the story. You might have invested emotionally in NPCs. If you go back to our NPC podcast, we might have connected with a bunch of people. We might have a real sense of purpose in the story. And then, the game just kind of goes like, well, we're done. I don't want to run the game anymore. And that's it. We're just going to stop it right there. And when we were younger, we did that a lot. We did that a whole heck of a lot. You were our storyteller exclusively. And I think that, man, you jumped all over the place. It took us we on average run, I don't know, like 4 or 5 nights of one-shot games. We'd be making new characters and running a game 4 or 5 nights in a row before we finally hit a game that had some traction that I think that you were able to like stick to and like just bring to life. So I mean that a lot of that comes into like planning failures and other things like that. But I mean, you were just trying to give us a game to kind of go with at that time. So I think that it's so important to end the game. Just give your players the closure on what they've been doing, and to be able to put meaning behind everything that they did. Just when you gathered them, you put meaning behind the gathering, and when you close the game, you put meaning behind the closing.
And Aaron hit the nail on the head. You got to put meaning to that closing. And so moving on to our next topic, I think is what to do when you see your game starting to fizzle, which you touched on very briefly. So storyteller ADHD, reason a game will fizzle. Players not very interested, reason a game will fizzle. Storyteller not very interested, reason a game will fizzle. So much crap happening in your life, reason a game will fizzle. Because don't forget to think about you. You are a human being. You might have, I don't know, a huge project. You might get shipped off to Georgia for 2 weeks to a month.
Your life might get uprooted for 1/12 of the year. So,
there's a plethora of reasons that a game fizzles, and it could be storyteller, player related on either way. First thing that you need to realize is that the key to winning this battle, to coming to an end with this, a successful end, I should say, is identifying when it's happening. You need, at the end of every game, Aaron and I always talk about maintenance. Maintenance for your game, whether it be an hour a day or an hour a week, depending on how much time you have. You need to take some time in that maintenance period to analyze where you're at in the game. Think about your players. Are they having a good time? Do they seem like they're having a good time? Is Johnny on his phone the entire freaking time? Is everyone on their phone the entire freaking time? And when you recognize, are you happy with the game? Or do you need to step away? So with a fizzling game, once you identify that, and although I have not done this yet because I'd say I matured as a storyteller, one thing that I might recommend, because I haven't really had a fizzle game, because as I matured as a storyteller, we kind of also switched to a completely new system, which is rotating storytellers. And I mean, oh my God, that has just been amazing. I recommend implementing it for your crew as quickly as possible, and encourage the players who've never storytelled, just tell a one-shotter, two-shotter. When you take the pressure off of the idea of like, man, I want to make a 17 or a 70-year campaign. Once that pressure's off, it really welcomes a lot of people to the table of storytelling. Once you say come on, man, a two-nighter, that's it. I mean, a combat can last an evening. One combat. Hell, I've had a combat that lasted 3. And all I planned was people shooting at each other. That was the depth of my storytelling right there. Woo! What's your story? Well, some crazy hillbillies are going to shoot at the good guys. The good guys are going to shoot back at the crazy hillbillies. That's my plan.
I mean, you're kind of hitting it right there on the head, which is, a lot of the fatigue and the fizzling out, or if your game's a dud, if you aren't planning your games, you're going to have more likelihood that one of those things are going to happen. I really, really urge you to go back to planning a game, V1 and V2. That's the development phase and the maintenance phase of planning a game. It'll, one, help you to design a game that is not a dud. Okay, you don't want to have a one shot. You don't want to try to be hoping for an epic game that falls off night one. Okay, even if you're doing like a one shot, you still want to be able to end your one shot. You should have some sort of idea of how you want to bring that to the end there, and a lot of that can be done through planning. I mean, you can see how your game is supposed to end, or the confrontation with your villain is supposed to end, and you can work that stuff out. It also prevents like I said, the duds from rising from the ashes there, which is you're not trying to throw a bunch of pitches at people. It's like in the Hollywood sense. You're not trying to do like the elevator pitch night one, and then and then you hate it, and the players like are sort of agnostic about it, or vice versa. And
agnostic. The players are kind of agnostic about it. They're not quite sure religiously whether or not there's a God.
But you know what I'm trying to say is that some people are interested, other people aren't. You're losing. You haven't gained enough interest, and there's no bones behind the story because it wasn't planned out. So again, I think
Aaron,
you can get around.
I got to interrupt you for a second, listeners. If you ever come up with a story that leaves your players questioning whether or not there is a God, don't tell that story. just leave that one and be. Just okay. That one was a flop. Yeah, because that's what you just said. It leaves your players agnostic.
That's not the right word. What's the ambivalent? Is that what's
ambivalent?
That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for ambivalent. Right. Sorry, guys.
If it leaves your players questioning whether or not there is a God,
don't tell that story. Don't
tell that story.
We all know how that's supposed to end.
I'm sorry. I knocked you right off your train of thought right there.
But I'm just saying that you can get around a lot of that by planning your game. I mean, the planning stages allow you to prevent it. But even if you do end up fizzling out, like, end the game. Like, just say, like, and then the players rode off into the sunset. Okay, it's a bad ending, but it's an ending.
Terrible ending, but it's an ending.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean,
so with fizzling out game, the first thing that I would do is once you recognize that it fizzles in process. One of the things that I've been toying with, it's more of an idea, it's concept idea. So I welcome players or GMs to try this, is informing your players that the game will be concluding probably in the next session or two. Set a timeline for when you're going to end the game. The reason being is it sets your players a time to finish anything that they want to do. So if you say you start off at the beginning of your session, you simply say, hey guys, I'm kind of fizzling out with this game, but I want to close it properly. So I'm probably going to end it not tonight, but the next night. Is there anything you guys would like to do? And if they lay out a bunch of ideas that's going to take too long, negotiate. Be like, okay, we can work on that. We can work on that. We can work on that. We can work on it. I'm not promising delivery. I'm just promising that we'll at least touch it. So a discussion with your players and an open, honest conversation of like, guys, this is going to end. And they might beg you. They might plead like, no, the game is going so great. I freaking love it. And that's awesome. Take that positive action. But if there's too much going on in your life or you don't love the story, don't tell the story just because your players love it. You have to be enjoying yourself as well. Otherwise, you're, a slave to the story, and that's not good. That's not good unless you're getting paid. Yeah. You're getting paid for it. Well, don't knock yourself out. I'll do anything for money.
It's a fun group
really
activity.
Bad. I'll do anything for money. Cheetos taste great.
The tasty, cheesy treats that you can eat one handful at a time.
Handful at a time.
No, they. Again, I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head there with it, which is, if you aren't having fun, then you are also part of this group that meets every week. You are not a slave to your friends to be their vehicle for fun. There should be enjoyment for you as a storyteller, putting challenges in their way, telling the story that you want to tell, but also them enjoying what you're doing, and all together. We always talk about, make sure that you're having fun, and this is all about fun, and it's not some competitive thing where like you have to grind yourself through a story that you absolutely freaking hate.
The World Series of Storytelling.
Now, if you have to do it for one session, maybe you bite the bullet for one session. I will point back to Jared's Point Pleasant example. Maybe you do it for one session because isn't really that long, and it's even if you don't love the game, it's still a reasonably good game, and it doesn't take very long to tell a couple of nights. So
exactly, like try to muscle through those 1-2 nights. Get your players in a place where they feel comfortable with the ending. It also gives you time to write your ending, which I think adeptly brings us to our last point.
One of the last points, which is how to write the ending. How to craft that ending, and how detailed do you need to make that ending?
Okay, great question. So, if you want a standardized ending, you're going to create maybe a 2 or 3 paragraph ending that nicely brings together the story. But this is level up your gaming. We're not talking about what to do to get by. We're talking about what to do to bring it up there, bring it up to the top.
You couldn't see, I was doing a little hand motion for Jared. I was showing him we were leveling up.
And it's driving. It's it's good. It's good. So the more detailed the ending, the better. I love bringing in detail, especially in an epilogue scenario where you have maybe a longer running campaign. Epilogues, I like to bring in if there were NPCs that the characters or your players truly fell in love with. And I don't just mean in the love sense. I mean like, oh my God, we fucking love working with Tom. You know, he was a hilarious NPC. Gravitate towards, bring them in. What happened with them? Epilogues are fantastic because they bring so much closure. There's so many movies that I'm sure we all sit around going, what happened next? Oh my God, what happened next? And it leads to sequels and you know, four movie deals and stuff like that. But with games, sometimes, you know, you don't get the 4-movie deal because we're not making money off this. Until Cheetos. No, I'm kidding. So really having that the high detailed ending is great. What I generally do, and I'm going to take you through my process because I always want you guys to have the toolbox. Like when you sit around going, well, how the heck am I going to do this? First thing, what I do, I find the music that I'm going to end this to. Okay. Music's key. Go back to our podcast that talked about music and sound. It is so easy to affect the human emotional scale by adding just a little bit of music. You know, I don't know if you can find on what's one, Aaron, what's one of the music like websites? What's it called? Like one of those music websites. Like Spotify. I'm not sure if somebody out there has a playlist on Spotify for music when I want to be depressed. I'm sure somebody does. Somebody out there has built one of these. So find music that you want to end it to. So once you identify that music that you kind of want to end it to, I play that music in a loop continuously as I type. Why? It keeps me centered into the theme and the mood that I'm trying to push out. And I play it on repeat because it keeps my tempo with the writing. So what I do is literally I will put like bracket, play, you know, let's go Battersea. And that will have a bracket at the end. And then I will go into what I am writing. Now, let's say it's an old wizard giving a speech about like how they have saved the princess and thus saved the kingdom. I make breaks in the writing for players to react. So the wizard will be like, tell me how did you get around the dragon? And in my writing, I'll create a bracket. I'll put it in italics rather than bold. Music I put in bold. Actions I put in italices. You know, allow player response and bracket. And then I'll move on to my next paragraph. Now, do not think of your end narrative as it has to fit X, Y, and Z. Your end narrative is a helpful guide in the path if everything goes perfectly well as you planned. If it doesn't, you at least have this very solid foundation of how you expected this to go. You might have writing that later in the narrative you come back to. So begin with that in mind. So I put those brackets in, and then I'll continue the narrative. You know, there might be some room for, because like your players might be like, I punched that dragon in the face and it just died. I'm that awesome. And they're responding literally, I'm that awesome, to an 800-year-old wizard who doesn't understand these sorts of things. You might want to ad-lib the original plan of him being like, well done, a truly tremendous strike and a brave maneuver. You don't want to just sucker to it. You know, ad-lib at that point. So then I will write out the whole thing. I'll write out the whole narrative. I will put in as much environmental detail as I need. I'll put in as much verbal interaction as I need. And then I bring it to a conclusion. Then what I will do is I will go back and I will read through it as I play the music once. I'll see if timing lines up. Did I hit this crescendo at a point where I want the crescendo to hit? This is very flexible, as players, their explanation of how they got around the dragon might take longer than you anticipated with the music. That's okay. Your music's background. You shouldn't be blasting it as loud as you can. They are the center stage, not the music. If you have to repeat or play back or just rewind the music to get to that point, simply hold your players. And this is my thing. There are storytellers that think that this is going to go off like a play that they have been directing for 6 months. It'll never go off like that. Do not hold yourself to that expectation. It is not a play. You have not been rehearsing it with your players. They don't have lines. You do.
Best laid plans.
Of mice and men often go awry.
Go listen to the podcast, episode 3, I think.
So they're going to break lines. They're not going to give answers that you anticipate. So try to make some of the verbal parts of the interaction vague to the largest extent that you can. I do it all the time. I make sure that wherever it says like player response here, like the next line is not like one where they're like, I see you did find the dragon key, because they might not have found the dragon key. It's more like, good, excellent, well done. Nice and vague, but congratulatory. The next part that I will generally go into, so I'll go through my music. I will make sure the crescendos hit where the crescendos hit. I see if I want to change music at all. I tend to, now that I've gotten kind of with Roll20 as this fantastic system that it is, now I can change music really on the fly very quickly. So I do that. But I guess back to my earlier point, don't hesitate to say to the players, like, please stand by for music. And stop them for a second so you can either rewind your music to the point where you wanted it at or to play a different song. You're not going to break the majesty of the moment because you had to go back for your music. You're not going to do that. Just be open and honest with them. Be like, hold on one second. Clickety, clickety, clack. I'm not sure if you guys could hear me tapping on my desk, but I hope you guys could. Clickety, clickety, clack. You bring up your music again and you proceed. The one thing that I'm going to tell you at the end of it, do not leave with a bad taste in the mouth. For example, mind you, I've barely seen like any of the Avengers movies. I think at the end of the last Avengers movie, like, isn't like 90% of the Marvel universe dead at this point? Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong.
I think you're thinking back to the first part of the one when it's a very unsatisfying ending in the first part. I mean, it leaves you in a place that like was. I mean, so spoiler alert: if you haven't seen Infinity War, skip ahead here. I'm going to talk about it for just a second.
Spoiler alert!
Yeah. So obviously, at the end of the first movie, Infinity War, they, Thanos snaps his finger, and people disappear, and half the universe is gone, and that's how the movie ends. Okay, and it's a very like, what the heck? It's a very cliffhanger-ish ending. And then if you take us into the next movie, which was Endgame, they sort of undo a lot of that, but they get rid of a lot of the main characters, which were the Marvel Phase 1 characters. They remove a lot of actors who had played their time as them over the course of 22 movies. They removed a lot of people and then enshrined new people to kind of take their place in the Marvel universe. So, that's just kind of to Jared's point, which is, make sure that you leave with a good taste in your mouth. Because if you're not happy with those changes, your players won't be happy with those changes either.
Exactly. One of our friends, Ken, he loves Cthulhu mythos and the writer behind it. And apparently, I've never read a Cthulhu book in my life. I've read a lot of his Wikipedia stuff, but I haven't read an actual book. Apparently, it almost always ends with the protagonist going insane and a crappy ending, like they're locked up in an asylum for the rest of their life. Do not do that to your players. Do not do that to your players unless, yes, ladies and gentlemen, pause for a dramatic moment. You have a concrete 100% ready to go sequel in mind. Okay, where we are gonna come back to this, because if you do that to your players and you don't have a sequel that like you're already working on, like, guys, I'm already working on that, you might tell them it's going to take a little bit to develop, which will entice them a little bit. Oh man, he's got plans for our characters later. But do not do not leave a bad taste in their mouth for the satisfaction of I left bad taste in their mouth, and that's how I wanted my game to end. The game is not only about you; it is about your players and your players having a good time. And if at the end of the game of chess they lose every freaking time, because in the end, don't forget you're the chess guy on the other side who can move the pieces however he wants. You can use a knight like a queen and move that piece wherever you wanted. So it isn't like I will rise to the challenge and beat him next time. It's you freaking cheated. And as storytellers, that's what we do. We cheat. We cheat horribly. But cheat on behalf of your players, for the better of your players. And like I said, if you are going to leave ashes in their mouth, make sure those ashes at some point will become sweet strawberries in the sequel. You just can't do that to your guys or your ladies. You can't do it. So yeah, and that's kind of my toolbox. Use those paragraph breaks, write to the music, and be prepared for actions on behalf of your players. So that's sort of my recommendation for you. Oh, write in a text editor, a tool, one more tool. I use Google. Like I think I said in one of our earlier podcasts that unless it's in your gaming system, whether or not that be your gaming notebook, or for us, it's Roll20. If it's not in there, it's not worth anything, because then it's just an idea floating in the aether of your imagination. Because of Roll20's capability, offline capabilities, you can't write in Roll20 wherever you are, especially if you have a job like mine where I end up traveling often. So, but for example, one time I was forced to drive down to central Illinois. I got to my location very early, but because I have Google Docs on my phone, I was able to open up Google Docs. I was able to type while I was sitting there waiting for the store to open so I could give my training presentation. And so having some place that you can make notes wherever you are for your ending, for that continuation of writing, I would recommend focusing on something like that. Like Evernote is good, I think. Evernote's another system, Google Docs. Don't make it where it's exclusive to your phone, because getting it from your phone to your laptop might be a pain in the butt. Or phone to your notebook might be a pain in the butt. Just make sure that you can move it around. Aaron, thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think you've said quite a bit on actually ending your game, and I'll end it with 2 points here. One is, this is one of the few spots. There are 2 spots. I mentioned this very early in our podcast. There are 2 when we first started the whole thing. 2 spots that you get to affect the most are going to be the opening and the ending of your game. The opening, you have complete control. And the ending, you have a limited amount of control. And Jared talked about that there with flexibility. He has done endings in the past where he did not have flexibility, where he wrote the ending. He then recited the ending, and the ending did not make sense because of how it was written. Okay? So again, you have to have flexibility. If your ending is supposed to end on the top of a cliff where you're fighting someone and the players confront your villain in the subterranean basement, make sure that you fill in those details and those gaps, and make sure that you are fighting in the subterranean basement and not on top of the cliff when you start telling your ending. Okay? Be sure that your ending is coherent to what the players have done within the game itself. Again, maintenance helps solve that problem. You need to use that time to make sure that your ending is adapted properly. Especially if you have not led the players to the top of the cliff and they were like, the villain's in the basement, and you're like, the villain's apparently in the basement now. So
apparently the villain has gone down to the basement, and ladies and gentlemen, do not just go to like, well, I'm reciting this because I damn well wrote it. So it's at the top. Don't do that.
Don't do that. It looks bad. It will not sit perfectly well with your players. The final thing that I wanted to mention was Jared brought it up earlier. The idea of splitting up your games and letting other people at your table storytell. I think if there's anything that I learned from doing this podcast with Jared all these times, this is, we're 20 plus episodes into this thing now.
Really, that many?
Yeah, we have learned, we have shared a lot of our knowledge and a lot of our mistakes with you. And our friend Brian, who lives in South Carolina, he listened to the podcast at, start to finish, and he told the game without really having told a successful game ever in his career, and he did it very well. And
oh my gosh, he did amazing.
I think that I said I would share upon what he had gotten out of this podcast. I think that he got something decent out of this podcast, or at least I think you should be able to take some of these things, hone into what your GM is doing today, and be able to put together 1-2 night games that are satisfactory to everyone at the table. It'll give your GM a break to be able to make better stories. It will give other players an opportunity to tell stories that they've always wanted to see come to fruition. Let somebody try to jump into that mold, see if you can get them out of their shell a little bit with that. I think that will help bring for better endings to your games, because it will force you to end games game to game, which is what we're kind of experiencing and doing now. So with that, if you're ever telling a story where your players are going to become agnostic, that's a bad story ending. But otherwise, if you want to get a hold of us or give us feedback, want to hear any information, us impart any information on certain topics, levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com. Otherwise, again, tell your other players to listen to the podcast. See if they can run a story after listening to the podcast. It's a helpful tool in that way. But for Jared, I'm Aaron. Have a good week, guys.
Have a great week, everyone.